Bamfield Services Committee meeting held February 20th, 2025. Is any errors or omissions? Seeing none, could I motion that the minutes of the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Committee meeting held on February 20th, 2025 be adopted? Moved by Director Sparrow. Second by Director Roth. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Next, we have petitions, delegations, and presentations. First on the agenda, we have one of our favorite people that comes to visit us on a regular basis, Seth Wright, Senior Manager from BC Transit, and he's going to give us an update on the Alberni Valley Custom Transit. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Chair Haggard. It's my pleasure to be here this morning. I'm happy to have this opportunity to present to the board, the Alberni Valley Committee about custom transit. I think staff at the ACRD felt like it was an appropriate time to provide a bit of an update on what was happening with custom transit, how it works, and what our plan is at BC Transit for continuing to support and develop custom transit in the coming years. We've been doing a lot of work on custom transit and are really excited with where we plan to take it in the coming years. And so it's a great time to provide a bit of an update on how it works. And my presentation will be supplemented, we hope, in the coming months with my colleague who works as the manager of accessible transit, Adam Bishop. And he will be able to come to this committee and provide a bit more of a wholesome review of where we expect to head in the coming years on the custom transit file. I'm just going to cover a few topics in the next 10 minutes about how HandyDART works, and then talk about sort of how it functions and provide a bit of a ridership update for the Alberni Valley. The custom transit ecosystem is HandyDART is the current brand at BC Transit, and we get funding obviously from a mix of the ACRD through the Transit Service Establishment Bylaw, and as well as from the province. HandyDART is funded fairly generously by the province, recognizing that it's a social service that's slightly different than your conventional local transit service. The ACRD exclusively is responsible for setting service levels and fares. BC Transit provides the assets and policies, so we provide the buses, we oversee the management of the contracts, provide program administration, which includes sort of HandyDART operation policy. I would denote that we work closely with TransLink in the Lower Mainland and align HandyDART service between BC Transit and TransLink, so there's sort of a consistent brand across the province. And we also provide marketing in the form of obviously the rider's guide, but also there's a number of materials to support HandyDART custom transit specifically. And then we work through partnership with PW Transit here in the Alberni Valley. They manage the facility, they manage day-to-day operations, they provide the dispatch for folks to call in and order a HandyDART ride, and deal with all the customer service provisions and provide us performance reports. So the actual metrics of who's riding the bus and when and from what electoral areas provided through. Here are two charts that show our funding relationship, and I recognize for local government that each service is funded slightly differently. Transit has this funding formula that's set out in the BC Transit Act, where it's established that the provincial share of conventional fixed route transit, so your Port Alberni Rider's Guide transit, the routes 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are funded directly by the city, is funded 46.69% by the province, with the balance provided by the city, minus the fare revenue. HandyDART is provided on a more generous basis from the province, which provides 66.69% of the total costs from the province, and then 33.31% comes directly from the ACRD, minus again the fare revenue. Fare revenue on custom transit comprises a smaller portion, but nonetheless, so the total net cost to the regional district is just short of 33.31%.
Do you want to take questions now, or do you want to wait to the end?
I'm happy to if you'll allow me some flexibility on the time limit.
Okay, absolutely. Director Cote?
Very quick question. On your charts here, it says municipal share. We're not, look, municipal. I'm not. So is that included in this amount? It says provincial share and municipal share. That's not,
Yeah, absolutely.
so how
Through
would that be divided up? Thank you.
through the chair to Director Cote. The reference to municipal is because the BC Transit Act envisions that most local governments in the province that would have transit partnerships with BC Transit are municipalities. However, through a reading of various provincial legislation, including the BC Transit Act, the Local Government Act, perhaps the Community Charter, and probably the Interpretation Act would indicate that we consider regional districts to be included within the definition of municipality by this legislation. So it's sort of legislative language that we try to be consistent with, and it's represented in our annual operating agreement because all that language is in the BC Transit Act. But in this case, the municipality is equivalent to the regional district for all intents and purposes.
Oh, thank you. It would be a lot clearer to regional districts if it was actually presented that way. That it said local governments rather than municipal, because we're not municipal. So I'm wondering, so then the share would be the same then
Yeah.
as for the municipalities as for the regional district.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the feedback. It's a useful point. So in Handy Dart, if we dive into what is custom transit, Handy Dart is BC Transit's brand and by extension TransLink's brand for accessible door-to-door custom transit service. And when we break it down and think about what does that mean, we think about custom transit. Each service, each trip is dispatched according to a schedule and route that's custom and developed, personalized based on the client's request and needs. So the dispatch is created for each individual day according to the trips that are requested for that day. It's accessible. The vehicles are designed specifically for clients unable to safely and independently navigate conventional city buses. And so there's that extra level of service, and buses are designed to accommodate both wheelchairs, but all types of mobility devices, and also have some fixed seats to enable folks that use a walker or other mobility device. It's door-to-door service, so the driver actually gets out and comes to your front door and provides that service from the front door and provides you service to the front door of your end destination. And it's specialized, so drivers have some information about the individual clients that they're servicing and what there might be their needs, if there's cognitive needs that they might need a bit more attention to make sure that they get off at the right location and don't get off prematurely or things like that. The drivers can be informed to provide that information. The service is delivered through 10 operating partners across the province. So this is just a little bit of provincial context. We also have 4 local governments that are involved. Nanaimo is the closest one. The RDN provides transit service of all types. And we also have one nonprofit that provides custom transit in the province. Sometimes we get requests about interregional service. So folks will sometimes ask us, why can't I take Handy Dart from let's say Port Alberni into the regional district of Nanaimo or other parts? And that's not provided within the service model of BC Transit. Through the BC Transit Act, there's limitations, and also the costs are already fairly high. And so it's not been something that we've considered as a key priority, although it does come up occasionally as a request. This slide provides a bit of context on a comparison between what is Handy Dart in the Alberni Valley and what it is in Victoria. So in the Alberni Valley, we operate 6 buses. In Victoria, you can see that we have 56 buses. The service hours are I think pretty good, and we do have some good weekend service that was recently introduced in the Alberni Valley, whereas Victoria has obviously much longer flexibility. I would say in a system like Victoria, there's a lot more flexibility for people to be able to go out for an evening concert or things like that. Whereas in a smaller community like the Alberni Valley, it's much more focused on getting people to day programs and to their activities and to be able to do shopping to live a full life, but there's not necessarily that level of service in the evenings and on weekends to accommodate all activities that they might want to endeavor upon. We also have taxi supplement, which is where there's a ride where it doesn't make sense. If there's a ride in Beaver Creek and there's no other rides going off to that part of town in the day, and the buses are currently occupied driving around Port Alberni, they might, and they know that client can use a taxi, they might dispatch a taxi. So the dispatcher might make a choice. Okay, we'll dispatch a taxi so that person can get a ride at their preferred time to be able to make their doctor's appointment. And that's the priority, is being able to meet people's rides at an appropriate time within a reasonable time window so that they can get to the service they need to. But we don't have Taxi Saver, which is a voucher-based program where people can use to use taxi instead of Handy Dart currently in Port Alberni. So that's just another piece of Handy Dart that we don't currently have here. Scheduling in Port Alberni is done on Nova software. We have Adept software in Victoria. We're looking at a custom transit solution that makes the software we use consistent across the province, and we're excited about that. That's work that's nearing implementation in the coming months. We have 2 admin staff to support the system in Port Alberni, and we have quite a bit more in Victoria. And then we have just under, or sorry, nearly 10,000 users in the Alberni Valley, but we have over 30,000 in Victoria. So that gives you a sense of scale. And Alberni Valley certainly has a strong use of custom transit, and a lot of people that are really benefiting from accessing it. At BC Transit, we think about the 2 types of trips as subscription and reservation trips. Subscription trips are trips when every Tuesday you want to go to a certain activity, and that activity is a scheduled regular part of your life. That would be a subscription trip. A reservation is a one-time trip. And so there is sometimes a tension in subscription trips that there's a lot of people that want to go to regular activities, and then it doesn't make for as much availability on reservation trips. This is something we look at. We're looking at setting standards from at a corporate level for how do we balance the need for reservation trips with subscription trips to be able to provide people with both the flexibility and the access to those regular programs that give such value and meaning to their lives, and give them the ability to engage with a consistent group. We have, in terms of service across the province, we have some data here just showing that we have most of our service is provided on Handy Dart vehicles, and a smaller portion is provided through taxi. And then we have, again, a smaller portion that's provided through, that's unable to be met, unmet trips. And so we can see that we do have unmet trips, and just the nature of people wanting to get to day programs is that it's very busy from 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and all the vans are out on the road. All the drivers are driving around, picking people up and dropping people off, and we're unable to meet all service. So we always have some level of unmet trips. Yeah, through the chair, of course.
Thank you. Over 30,000 unmet trips within a year. Do we know where those trips are from?
That data is province-wide, and I think I will have some stats for the Alberni Valley in a couple of slides, so maybe I can address that. So here, looking at Port Alberni Handy Dart ridership, we can see that unmet trips are only 58. So we're doing pretty well in this community. And that is total over the last fiscal year from April 1st, 2024 to March 31st, 2025. But we did deliver 15,907 trips, and we have 355 taxi trips. So taxi was dispatched 355 times to provide that service. And that threshold that I was talking about in competing priorities between subscription and reservation trips is pretty close to where we'd like to see it. So 60% of services delivered through regular subscription trips, and 36.8% is available for reservation trips. We also work on our management of things like no-shows and cancellations. No-shows are people that don't call and the bus comes in and no one's there. And cancellations are with the required amount of notice or but those levels are sort of within a respectable tolerance and what we're satisfied with and not causing too much distress in this community. In some communities, those levels are much higher and sometimes cause us consternation on being able to manage that. So we've had to implement programs to more to apply some leverage to ensure that we keep our service reasonably efficient. I've provided some ridership data through PW Transit over the last year, looking from April to March, just last month. And I've also provided a table to the right, so both the chart and the table line up. And but because the electoral area ridership is relatively low, I've provided the table to highlight exactly those specific numbers by month. I would note that electoral area B, Beaufort, is not included in this because there's not any ridership from that electoral area. I contacted PW Transit staff and confirmed that this was accurate. And they said there was a client over a year ago, but that client passed away, and so that there hasn't been any ridership from there.
Go ahead, Director McClellan.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. I'm sorry. Gotta remember, I'm getting old. I realize there isn't any from Beaufort in as regular riderships, but there's on page 18, you've got a total of 8,476 active clients. And then we go down to the one we're looking at now, and I can't find where those 8,000 are. Where are they from and what's being counted? It doesn't add up in what I've been looking at.
In terms of the 8,000 clients being not showing up every month in terms of
Well,
ridership?
if they're active, then I expect they're around most of the time, but maybe they're not. And so it just looking at the Alberni, the slide you have up there right now, it doesn't have anywhere near 8,000 on a regular thing. So I'm just curious where they are from. Is that including the city, the municipality, as well as the regional district? They put all together, and how do you balance that? Because the numbers weren't balanced, and maybe I'm looking at them wrong.
Sure. The 8,400 active clients are representative of all the clients that have successfully gone through the eligibility criteria and met with an occupational therapist to be eligible for a handy dart service. And then there are people that have used the service at least once in the last 2 years, I believe it is. And so they haven't been struck off the lists every 2 years. There's effectively a rolling audit that enables us to remove clients that aren't using it. But certainly there's a lot of clients that might use it on rare occasion when they don't have access to other transportation. And there's certainly lots of folks that use it very regularly, but we have a broad spectrum of levels of use. And I think that's sort of what I believe the question is driving at, is sort of what's the difference between having a rather large client list. The second part of the question is, where are they geographically distributed of these 8,400 clients? And I don't have that information at my fingertips, but I'm happy to go back to my colleague and see if we can provide an estimation. It would probably require some data analysis because our client list would have postal code information, and then we'd have to put that through a filter of your electoral area boundaries. But I think that's probably something we can look at if that's desired.
Yeah, I guess that would be fine. The basic thing is where is the funding coming from for them all, and what it is, and that's the question I've got, and I've heard a few other questions that are the same. So we'd like to know that. Thank you.
Sure. I think that this next slide provides a bit of context on the financial picture in terms of performance. This is because our finance team is just completing our year end right now, just completed it a few days ago, but that hasn't gone through the filter to be imported into this data output. I'm using data that's a year older, and I've highlighted in yellow a couple actual ridership number metrics or key performance indicator metrics for the 23-24 BC Transit fiscal year. And what I see here is that the overall system performance in Port Alberni is exceptionally better than our tier 3 performance average. So we look at small custom transit systems across the province, and this includes systems like Cowichan Valley, Cranbrook, Trail and Castlegar, Prince Rupert, Squamish, Sunshine Coast, and Terrace. It's 10 systems across the province. I didn't list them all, but this is what the tier average numbers represent. And we can see that on a ride per cost, we're running $34 approximately, and tier average. So those other systems that I listed are running at $61 per ride. And when we look at the operating cost per service hour, we're running $90 for running the bus on the road for an hour, and $110. So Port Alberni is running a very efficient system and running a great service value here.
Dr. Cote, did you have a question?
I do, thank you. Back on page 11, there is numbers of rides, and one ride would be one way.
That's right.
Okay, so just looking at the numbers, Sprout Lake there's only 4 months that actually have more than one ride. 3 that actually have no rides. And because we pay by assessment based, it's much more than what is being explained here per ride. So looking at that, I'd like to know if any of the 58 unmet trips were at Sprout Lake, because just looking at the numbers, there's a lot of ones here as well. Do we have that information? Thank you.
I'm just looking to my colleague Eddie, because he used to work in the custom transit industry, and I'm curious if the rides are actually represented round trips.
Yes, and through the chair, no, they're not round trips, they're single trips. However, we did confirm with the operating company when we were looking at the trips and when we were going through earlier reports that there weren't any unmet trips from Sprout Lake, and every call that was booked or attempted to be booked actually was delivered for Sprout Lake.
Any of those trips, do we know if any of those trips were the taxi rides? And just wondering why we don't have a taxi saver program. Thank you.
I would have to confer on both those pieces with my colleagues. I'm not sure if Eddie might have information on those pieces. No, I think that the taxi saver piece is a specific community conversation and a historical conversation, but it would certainly be additional funding. It would be a request for additional dollars, because the program is based on providing $80 vouchers. So you get $80 vouchers, you come to the regional district office and give $40, and you can get one package of vouchers a month. And then you can use those to ride taxi around town instead of using HandyDart. So it's ultimately provides that service flexibility to our clients, but can be a significant additional cost on top of the HandyDart service already.
Director Roth?
Thank you. Looking at the actuals for fiscal year 23-24, the operating cost passenger trip $34.20. So that's one way. Just want to confirm that. So if it was a return trip, it would be $68. Holy, okay, thank you.
Director Jack?
Sorry, the question would be, if there are more trips, the cost per trip would go down. Like if it's a one-way, but there's a trip back, then that counts as 2 trips, and therefore the math gets better.
Yeah, it may, but I would be reluctant to commit to that, because it really depends on the dispatch and the efficiency of the dispatch for that particular day. And really the efficiency of the dispatch depends on lots of people riding it from a similar origin to a destination and sort of filling up the bus with at least 4 or 5 passengers. But if you have one bus riding around on the passenger and coming in from Beaver Creek, it's obviously going to be slightly less efficient. Those rural and remote rides are going to be less efficient than the in-town service.
Okay, so as a follow-up, then efficiency depends on a couple of things. So depending on the day and the amount of travel there is, and whether or not a specific dispatcher would be able to string them together in an efficient way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a key piece of why we're excited about having dispatch software that will enable us to look at how is this being dispatched. Historically, it was being dispatched on using an Excel sheet and Google Maps, but with technology bringing on board, we're able to optimize that dispatch.
Is that a key difference between Novus and Adept, or is it a different?
No, they're both
They both do
sort
that?
of modern technologies that is allowing dispatch, but those programs are pretty novel and somewhat inconsistent across BC Transit. So we're employing one consistent software technology across BC Transit, and then we'll be able to pull data. We'll be able to see, okay, we can see that ridership is focused from these areas on these service days, and there might be some policies and procedures that we can implement to optimize service and work with you to say this is actually what's happening, and this is what we're seeing on an electoral area district basis or a community specific basis, and be able to drill deeper into the data. So right now we have the level of data I'm presenting is the level of data we get. We don't get more granular data. But with having a one technology dispatch solution in the future, we'll have much greater ability to dive deeper into the data and present a much better understanding, more robust understanding of what's actually happening in terms of dispatching routes across the communities. So I guess just before I end, I wanted to talk about why is HandyDart critical in these rural areas. And I think we talk a lot about aging in place and folks in rural communities. I myself have lived in rural communities much of my life and feel like and have parents in rural communities and as we think towards our older years and the opportunity to access that service, perhaps after we've had to give up our driver's license, that enables us to stay in the home that we're most comfortable in and delay that unfortunate time where we might have to move into a care home or something like that. So it enables that critical piece. It also allows people to stay connected to their community and be a participant in their community. I think it provides great value, and we hear really beautiful stories on a regular basis about the connections that people have. It obviously places less strain on the medical system, needing to provide less access to care homes and providing people service to get to medical service when they need it. And for many people, it's obviously the only mode of transportation available. We serve a lot of people, and the drivers that provide HandyDart service are often on a first name basis and really know their clients and have personal connections with their clients that really light up a lot of people's lives and provide that value. Finally, the HandyDart modernization piece. So in the last year, BC Transit has said, we don't know about as much about custom transit as we want to know. We feel like it's an area that we've under-resourced historically, and we would like to get a lot better at dealing with HandyDart transit and custom transit. We brought in Adam Bishop as our new manager of accessible transit. We've repositioned him within the organization to be able to have more access to resources and to be better supported in terms of pursuing a custom transit strategy. We hired some of the strongest transit consultants in the country to left turn, right turn to develop this 5-year plan for where we want to go in transit. And they've identified some quick wins, some long-term priorities, and some medium-term priorities for the coming years. And we're engaged very actively in doing that work. A key piece of that work, one of the quick wins, was to get a standardized dispatch solution across the province. We're developing some key performance indicators that dive deeper and allow us to have more granular data for what we're looking at and being able to see what's happening in service. We're also building a bit of a repertoire in terms of what are the stories in terms of our users and our clients and the value that HandyDart Transit provides to the daily life. We're also looking at potentially rebranding HandyDart because we recognize that it's a bit of an outdated and inappropriate name for the service, and we'd like it to reflect the current current time and age. So there's lots of work that we're doing on the custom transit. And as I said at the beginning, I'm happy to work with your staff to line up a future presentation where our bishop can speak in greater depth on this work.
Thank you so much. Director McClellan, you had a question?
Yeah, just looking over all these numbers I was asking about before and how they're coming down. Do you, or does anybody have a breakdown as to the cost for the city of Port Alberni versus their district around Port Alberni for calls? Is there a percentage of paying? It just looks like maybe that's all the city ones that are those 8,000 some odd that are back on page 11, wherever it was. And I'm just curious if we have a percentage breakdown of the cost.
Terry had that.
Just that, I don't know if the question is more of a BC Transit question or a ACRD question, because because we requisition based on land and improvements. So for example, the city of Port Alberni pays 58% of the service. That isn't changed by ridership numbers. So we take the total, that is the local government or municipal share, and we're dividing that on the basis of land and improvements, which is based off the letters patent that runs this service. So City of Port Alberni pays 58.05%, Beaufort pays 2.5%. These are 2025 percentages. They change with changing assessed values. Area D is 21.32%. Area E, Beaver Creek is 9.32%, and Area F, Cherry Creek is 8.82% in 2025.
That's good.
Director Roth?
I mean, thank you very much.
So this means that the city uses it more, so that would mean they pay less per capita. Is that not, would that be a fair way to interpret that?
Yes, it's not divided per capita in terms of costs. So if we were want to change the apportionment method of this service, the board has the ability to do that, but it is by 2/3 of the participants of the service to change it. And we are still running off of old letters patent here because we haven't made any changes to the service over time. But if we do want to do that, it would be a conversion process as well. But an apportionment discussion, just like we're about to have on aquatics, could be had on the custom transit service as well.
Thank you.
Seth, I just want to really thank you for expanding this fantastic service to the weekends. I think it's very much appreciated by the people who use it. And kind of a follow-up to that page 20, where it breaks down the ridership between Sprout Lake, Beaver Creek, and Cherry Creek. The numbers for Beaver Creek are significantly higher than for the other two areas. So I was wondering if Director Sparrow or Director Cote had any insight as to why the service isn't used by the people in your area, and is there something that the regional district can do to help promote it more, or do something to help people take advantage of this fantastic service? Do anybody of you know why it's not being utilized as much? Dr. Cote.
A lot of residents at Sprout Lake are absentee owners. And it's a trend. We are a recreational residential area. I know one person that used the transit and has recently passed. It seems that there's less and less people that are disabled that are able to live in this rural community. I'm just looking at the numbers, and it's pretty bad as far as ridership. We did talk about doing an educational session with the community, talking about that this is available for people, but most people that need the service know about it. As far as that's my opinion. When you become disabled to the point where you need handy dart service. Unfortunately, Sprout Lake, I was looking at bringing in a custom transit service where it was hybrid, so that it could pick up people, but it's not people that are completely disabled that need to be wheeled in a special kind of chair that is specifically designed for Andy George. Yeah. Thanks.
And Director Sparrow, do you have any insight? Because the loan numbers for Cherokee actually quite surprised me.
They do surprise me a bit too. A couple of reasons. I think they may not know what service I did for the service will be 6 days a week. But the other thing is the fact that as people become less mobile, they usually revert back into the city where their sidewalks and their current blocks are closer back to services. So a lot of people that have moved in closer to the services that are provided, so they can get their blockers, they can get their equipment out to the handy door. Whereas being out in Cherry Creek, it's a lot more gravel and a lot more longer driveways. It's harder to get to the video. I don't know, we get that one. I don't know. Hopefully they'll get more use out of it. We should keep people moving and see what we can do.
Maybe you might want to work with our communications director and see if there's any way that you can work together to try and move the service in your area. Because I think it's such a great service. It needs to be utilized more. Yeah, fantastic. Dr. Ron.
I think one of the reasons why it's used more in Beaver Creek is because we have several supportive homes that they bring people in that have these needs. It's not necessarily that they own the home, that the people that are using it is supportive housing. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments for Seth? Dr. Cote.
Thank you. Just looking at the budget and I'm seeing that Sprout Lake, it's a 48.56% increase this year to our budget. So Sprout Lake is actually paying $51,323 for 28 rides, which is really hard to accept going forward when there is no ridership. And I see that there's looking at an increase for extended service. Going to be an issue. Thank you.
Carrie.
I just wanted to remind the directors that we had received during COVID, I can't remember what they were called, but they were kind of like COVID restart grant that we were able to use as a rate stabilization reserve. So those increases weren't necessarily because of increased operational costs from BC Transit this year. It was because that reserve fund has now ran out, and which was our ability to stabilize rates for a couple of years. And then we had the expansion as well. So, and yes, there is some more increase coming next year. And then unless the directors choose to expand the service further, things should stable out a little bit after that.
Any other questions or comments? Say none, thank you. And Dr. Jack, sorry.
Could you go, oh, I guess you're not sharing anymore, but in regards to in the 2024 part of the roadmap that you showed, you said you're identifying KPIs that will help better kind of explain the utility to the community as a whole. Is that something that you're completed and that you're measuring now, or is that something that will become online later? So I'm interested in what the KPIs are, because I don't think per cap and I don't think ridership are good measures of social utility for transit, but I don't have the language to talk.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's a great question. I really appreciate it. I think that this is the work that we're just starting to embark on, and Adam Bishop has been working as manager of accessible transit for just under a year now, or close to a year now. And he's talking about these things and wanting to get a grasp on them and wanting to bring us into the current sort of moment of accessible transit across North America. And certainly the province has been promoting accessibility, and as we have baby boomers aging, we need to improve our operational efficiency and ability to provide great high quality service. And so it's becoming more necessary to do this work. And I would say we're still in an infancy. So the data we have is fairly representative of like what I presented today in terms of missed trips and unmet trips, and subscription trips versus reservation trips. That's the level of key performance indicators that we have, as well as that slide with the chart that showed all the numbers and showed sort of performance metrics. That's really the data we have now, but we're looking towards the future where we have KPIs that speak more to that broader equity lens and can inform sort of what is the access to services, what's the proportion of the community that's marginalized. Having good census data helps that. We struggle across transit as data nerds ourselves, and wanting to be able to understand and tell a more robust story about what the community's needs are, and then how we're meeting those needs or not meeting those needs, and how we can better meet those needs through understanding the quantitative as well as qualitative data across our communities.
So in regards to the development of KPIs and talking about the utility of transit, are there going to be engagement sessions or discussions that, you know, wider communities can take part in? I'm just really interested in how that can go, because some of the solutions to some of the math problems that have been talked about here are just to increase ridership. And those are the types of things that we should be talking about, as well as finding value in dispatch or that sort of thing as well, right? So I don't know what that looks like exactly, but I do think that there is value in looking into that, and I just am interested. So keep that in the back of your mind, you know, send me an email whenever those kind of nerdy discussions take place. Thank you.
Awesome. I will say, I don't think that there's any engagement currently planned, but I think it's an excellent idea. I would say perhaps to address some of this conversation around level of awareness across the system, one idea that I think makes a lot of sense, especially for regional districts, especially that it might not have might have populations that aren't familiar with a service but might benefit from a service, is what we've done is included sort of one single, like a one sheet pamphlet sort of thing with your mail out. So if the regional district's doing a mail out for the taxation or for a change in your recycling and composting system or something like that, with that mail out, we can include a little piece on HandyDart as part of that. That's something that I think might be beneficial. So we can work with staff if that's the desire of the committee.
I think that's a fantastic idea. Cynthia, can you make notes? Maybe the two of you can connect and get that. Dr. Sparrow.
Thank you. I have one question in regards to you transit here, but you don't go across to the Nanaimo now. So what happens if a person needs to go to Nanaimo and they don't have a purchase of a taxi? How do we get there now?
I think right now, it's sort of what historically people have always done, which is you beg, borrow, and make it work if you need to get there. You get a ride with family or friends or however, or you're limited and you make do with what you have access in your community. This next presentation by my colleague Jacob, you've provided a good segue to that presentation, in that he will address that question of interregional service. So I might wait and let him speak to it, and then we can answer the question if it's not answered by the end of the next presentation.
Dr. Roth?
Just one last question. Now that it's changed in the medical system where you telephone your doctor, you don't necessarily go in, have you seen a decrease in ridership?
No, that's an interesting question. I think that happened during the pandemic. Certainly some systems, and perhaps on the conventional side, Port Alberni perhaps has been slower to regrow its ridership after the pandemic than some other communities. And that's a variety of factors, and the specific drivers are really hard to get at. That may be a contributing factor, but it's probably one of many. We are well past what we saw pre-pandemic. So before March 2020, our ridership was gangbusters, and it dropped significantly and precipitously when the pandemic happened, and it took a few years to get ridership back. As Terry Fong spoke about earlier, the Safe Restart money enabled service levels to be maintained through the pandemic, which enabled BC Transit Systems to be the first transit agency in North America to get to 100% post-pandemic or pre-pandemic ridership levels. But ultimately, we're doing better on the whole, and so we're not able to sort of parse to that level of detail of what the drivers of ridership growth or slow down our. But we certainly have lots of people that definitely need to go to the doctor in person, and we see that especially on the ambulance side.
Seeing no other questions, I would like to thank you so much for coming and doing that great presentation. And now I'd like to invite up Jacob Burney, Transit Planner for BC Transit. He's going to give us an update on Transit Future Service Plan. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Jacob Burnley, I'm Transit Planner at BC Transit. I'm taking over this file from Victor, who is the previous planner, who I'm sure you have all met and had worked with in the past. So today I'm going to be providing a bit of background on where we're at with the Transit Future Service Plan for Port Alberni, how the system has grown over the past decade or so, and what we're seeing as prioritizing for investments going forward in the next sort of 5 to 7 years. So I'll just begin with a bit of a background on the current context and performance of the system, a bit of background on the engagement that we've conducted for this plan, the residents and riders that we heard from, their feedback, their responses, and then also looking at identifying some of our key expansion priorities going forward, like I said, for the next 5 to 7 years, both from a local lens and also from an interregional service connection piece, which I know is obviously of key importance for the region, and then also looking at some of those service gaps and infrastructure priorities as well. Skip the slide there. I think I skipped a slide there, but I'll just mention that really what we're looking at doing is providing that interim guidance for the community around prioritizing service investments based on the data that we're collecting, both from a public feedback standpoint, but also from the data that we're seeing from our onboard dashboards, looking at what the ridership is looking like on specific routes, looking at where we want to target those investments. So in terms of transit today, I'm sure that you're aware of the context of service in the community, but we offer 4 routes, 3 of which are standard AM, PM routes. There's one route we have that's sort of a consolidated route for select off-peak periods. So for weeknights and also on Sundays. I will mention that we have a relatively small number of fleet vehicles in Port Alberni, but that we are, through our fleet department at BC Transit, looking at more intently in the future at right-sizing those vehicles to better suit the routes that they serve. Currently, we offer just over 12,000 service hours through the year. However, as I'll note later in the slides, there are some pretty obvious gaps in the system that we would be looking at addressing in the coming years. So transit today, just to give a bit of background, we have our 4 routes here, all kind of working as circulator style routes, covering various portions within the city of Port Alberni and outside of the city as well. All these routes work on a pulse system, so they leave the Redford exchange, Redford at 12th, they leave that exchange at the same time, roughly. They go and they do their loops and they arrive back at the same time to allow for efficient transfers. I'll speak to sort of how that plays into future expansion later in the presentation, but that's kind of just a context of where we're at with the system and its structure currently. So in terms of transit need, we really need to be thinking about how we orient the service around density and around where populations and concentrations of key populations are located. So we are looking at some of those defined key corridors, both when we look at census data, but also when we're working with the city of Port Alberni on their various future plans as well when it comes to transportation and community development. And there is likely to be some continued support for orienting our investment on those core routes in those core areas to really maximize return on investment from a ridership perspective. really, the system does need to support trends for population and support riders with transportation solutions that are not only affordable, but also efficient and effective. And so we are looking long-term at prioritizing some of those key north-south connections, perhaps making those routes a bit less circuitous in the long term. But really, this plan is more of an interim plan for the, like I said, for those next 5 to 7 years. What are those achievable goals that we can identify and prioritize to improve the system as a whole for users? So I mentioned population density, and I mentioned those key census areas, and you can really see here that the routes that we have currently in operation actually serve a lot of those areas quite well within the city of Port Alberni. However, we are aware, and like a number of you have said today already, those interregional connections are one of those missing pieces that we are looking at bridging the gap on. So in terms of system performance, where we're at, you can see that there was, as a whole, ridership drop-off during the onset of the COVID pandemic. Unsurprising, this is common amongst all systems, all mid-sized systems in BC, but we have seen gradual ridership return. We're not yet at 100% ridership recovery from COVID. However, when we look at the ridership, or we look at the service hours that Port Alberni provides for the system, and we compare it to other systems of a similar size within BC, Port Alberni actually offers they offer fewer service hours, but we're seeing more riders per service hour. So we're actually getting quite good return. You're getting quite good return on investment for the system from a ridership perspective. And then I'll also mention that you'll notice on the second graphic below there, the scheduled service hours have remained stable. So this is something that we saw as a trend across BC Transit systems, but was not the case in other systems of a similar size in other provinces. So comparable transit systems saw cuts to hours. Service hours have remained stable through the pandemic and through pandemic recovery as well. In terms of route level performance, the Route 2 Pacific Rim route, which offers service via the secondary school, via various rec facilities through the Uptown Core and up to Walmart. This is the highest ridership route in the system, quite notably, with about 22 rides per hour that the route is in service. We did note that there are some lower performing routes, notably the 3 and the 4. However, the 4 is running during off-peak times, so it's to be expected that we're to see lower ridership. And then the Route 3, which operates via River Road, that service generally, because it's servicing an area of lower density, the ridership catchment is therefore lower, and that is expected. So in terms of this plan and the engagement, so we took all this data that we have via our sources internally and brought it forth to the public for their review. We conducted a real variety of methods for public engagement. We looked at a public survey, and we received some positive response from our public survey. There was a number of supplemental comments that came with those surveys as well that provided a bit more context, a bit more information, and a bit more of an understanding of the lived experience of the Port Alberni transit user. We offered an open house, key stakeholder workshops as well. We did engagement with local First Nations partners who were very engaged in the process and provided us with some pretty valuable feedback as well on where those gaps and where those connections need to be made. And then we also offered a transit operator specific survey. And this is incredibly valuable because the operators are the ones on the day-to-day that are out there seeing the system, where the issues are. And they were able to identify some pretty obvious priorities that we need to consider investment on going forward. So who we heard from. So just very briefly, I will mention that from the survey, less than 30% of users were actually transit riders. So it was really interesting that there was a strong appetite to participate in the engagement process, even from those who weren't people who use transit on a weekly or monthly basis. So given the split, we did separate the survey out. And we looked at both feedback from non-users and feedback from the riders. And the majority of the respondents obviously were from the city proper. And 46% of them were noting that they were using transit multiple times, once or multiple times a week. So we did have a core base of respondents that had a strong lived experience and a strong sort of record of using the service and understanding where those challenges are. And when we're looking at user breakdown, really an interesting split between people who use the system every day or a couple days a week, once a week, all the way down to people that might only use it on occasion. So more of those fair weather riders. And that's one of the key objectives too, is to support the regular rider, but also how can we attract more people to the system and provide a more competitive and a more efficient option for travel in the community. So we heard some interesting feedback from both users and non-users, but what we noted was that the riders who use the system on a regular basis actually identify the service as being quite reliable, and that really comes down to the transfers between routes. So currently, the system operates, like I said, on that pulse schedule where all the routes leave at the same time. They kind of all come back at the same time, and people can connect between their routes quite easily. This is not the case in every system, and generally, the satisfaction rates are a bit more varied, but we did see strong satisfaction amongst riders, and the service reliability. So how reliable the service is, is there any on-time performance issues? Are the buses arriving when people expect them to? We saw quite strong positive response from that. We did note that there was an interesting gap in perceptions between users and non-users around safety, both on board the bus and at transit stops. So largely riders predominantly they felt safe on board and when using the system, but there are perceptions that from some non-users that transit is from their experience or their understanding could be deemed unsafe. So just something to consider, and something also that we think BC Transit should also be working on to sort of market and communicate the service and its benefits in a different way as well. So, oh, I think I skipped a slide there. I'll just mention in when it comes to future service, really the big gap was around frequency and span of service. How often the bus is coming and how late does it run? Those were the two biggest issues. And those were issues that both non-riders and riders both had concerns and complaints about. And that's to be expected. So that is something that we really want to look at investing in, is those gaps in the existing service. And then also there was very strong support, and Director Sparrow, you had mentioned this before, but the interregional service to Nanaimo, that was something that was really strongly supported from both riders and non-riders as that essential connection to the RDN to access the medical appointments, the services, whatever that might be that we can't access directly here in the Alberni Valley. So I'll mention that a little bit later in the presentation, but it was something that was brought up repeatedly from both users and non-users. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry, Sprout Lake. I'm a slide ahead here. I'll mention Sprout Lake and transit service to Sprout Lake. There was a number of targeted questions in the survey that spoke to potential expansion of conventional fixed route transit service to the electoral area. We did some early engagement in this process, and there's also been some past feasibility studies that did outline those opportunities for service expansion. They did receive strong to mixed support from transit users and Port Alberni residents. However, there was some notable opposition to that proposal from Sprout Lake residents, notably that it wouldn't be a service that would be really utilized to the extent it would need to be justified. And based on the feedback regarding some of the local funding particulars and around usage considerations, we're not adding service to Sprout Lake as a formal item within this plan for immediate expansion. It is something that we'd like to continue to look at and potentially conduct additional service discussion reviews or a feasibility study long term. But based on the current structure and the resources that we have available, it's not something that we've included in this plan. So now looking at some of the items that we are looking at including in this transit future service plan, and the following slides will provide a bit more of a breakdown, and I'll run through a bit more in detail, but I will note that all of these, because of the way the system is scheduled, like I said, there might be the service hours that I've listed as being sort of what is expected in terms of resources. Those are subject to change. Our scheduling department right now is currently working through these various items to get a sense of what resources are needed to facilitate these expansion items. So first and foremost is improving evening service on the Route 4. So the Route 4, like I said, it's a combination of those three daytime routes, provides quite good coverage through the city and to the north as well. And there's been expressed appetite to improve this service to about 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. So additional service, definitely key in providing those those trip connections for service workers who might be working late, people who are out in Port Alberni for social reasons, whatever it might be. Definitely key, and something that was a common thread amongst both users and non-users as a priority. The second priority we're outlining is additional service on Route 2 Pacific Rim. I mentioned that this is the highest ridership route in the system. We're seeing continuous it's slow, but it's continuous growth year to year on this route. And there was strong interest in supporting expansion from both users, non-users, and also from transit operators. We're noting that really the bulk of the ridership tends to be bunched around school bell times. But and the current service is efficient. We're not seeing issues of pass ups or people being left behind because the bus is too full. But as the system starts to grow and continues to grow post pandemic, this is a route that we want to continue monitoring the performance data for to get a better understanding of how we can maybe adjust trips, add specific trips during certain key points in the day to support those riders. Third here is expanding transit services to Seychelles First Nation. This is something that, it was kind of part of past discussions regarding a Sprout Lake connection. It's something that we believe we still would be able to facilitate through potentially a transit service agreement or a community transit partnership agreement. And this was something in our direct conversations with the First Nation they had expressed strong interest for. When we look at ridership on the Route 3 via River Road, we note that the stops that are closest to First Nations land are actually quite well utilized stops, and there could be appetite to expand further into further on reserve, which is really exciting and something that we definitely want to pursue. There would be some further operational and feasibility assessment type work that would need to be done to promote and facilitate this, but it is something we would like to include in the plan, at least for that initial review and initial assessment. And then interregional service to the RDN, the hot topics, so to speak. Beyond the Valley specifically, based on all that survey data, based on that customer data, and also based on, we asked transit operators in our survey, what was the number one question, or what was the number one area that we don't currently service that people want transit to? And most of the transit operators had mentioned that it was to the RDN. And there is a potential option that we could provide some level of service to connect to the Route 9 that terminates in Qualicum Beach, and provide an interregional connection, which is exciting. And I can take a question if you'd like.
That's the one that goes to Ravensong Pool, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've done a couple of preliminary routing options, and we've provided a couple of cost or a couple of service hour type scenarios, how long the bus would take, how many trips a day it could look like. We've provided a bunch of those scenarios to our scheduling department. And right now they're ongoing, sort of evaluating those to see how they might align with the service. I will mention that this is definitely a high level item that requires quite a bit more groundwork. But not sure what's going on there. But it is something we've noted for inclusion in the plan. And like I said, really strong support across from transit users. 93% of people who responded to the survey supported that extension, 65% amongst all respondents. So across all the items, apart from evening service, this was one of the top priorities that was identified for future review at the very least. And then I won't speak too much to this in depth, but on-time performance, and this is kind of a standard sort of item that we include in a lot of plans for a lot of various communities, especially those that are growing and seeing ridership return, is just the idea that we want to think about those year-to-year cyclical investments in transit hours as when we consider things like construction or works projects, when we think about additional traffic on key corridors, we're seeing not so much in Port Alberni, but in other communities, what we're seeing is that the same routes that have been run for 10, 12 years, it's taking those buses longer to make those same trips because of various external factors. And it's always a good idea to have some additional hours in the annual transit budget to consider those adjustments. This is something that we'll likely have more deliberation on with both the regional district and the city, but just something that I want to kind of throw in the plan as a placeholder if we see those impacts with community growth. And then just briefly, I'll speak to the custom transit service priorities. In consultation with the staff, we've identified some goals. These are quite high level, but they really support a lot of the historical objectives of aligning the custom service with our fixed route conventional service. So we've noted that there are some peak travel periods that may need additional capacity from handy dart vehicles. There's definitely a desired expansion from to and from the Seychelles First Nation. They've had interest in supporting Handy Dart expansion as well, and then bridging the gap with the evening and weekend service. So better aligning the hours that we offer on our conventional fixed route systems with Handy Dart as well. So all these priorities are currently being evaluated by our Custom Transit Division at BC Transit, and the same folks that worked with Seth to develop his presentation are working through these right now to provide us sort of service hour estimates and some costing as well. So this plan today and the plan, once it's approved, we're not, there's no financial commitment to the plan, so to speak. We would be returning on an annual basis with these items for prioritization based on yours and the city's feedback. Infrastructure priorities, obviously looking at transit shelters and beyond the routes and the service itself, thinking about how can we make the experience more enjoyable and more comfortable for the user, thinking about things like transit shelters and transit benches. BC Transit does offer a program that can help support these investments. And then also looking from an operations and maintenance perspective, a larger maintenance and operations facility. So a larger bus garage will likely be needed if we're going to be facilitating all of these expansion items, because a lot of them will require additional buses to be procured. So just a caveat on that. That's something that our operations team is working through and deliberating on. But again, just want to sort of put an asterisk on that point. And then lastly, as I wrap up here, I will just mention that how we go moving forward. So the plan for you today, like I said, doesn't require from the regional district's perspective or the city's perspective, doesn't require any cost share or financial commitments at this time. This is really meant to be high level and to just identify, are these the priorities that we want to go forward with, balancing out those interregional connections with those local connections. And once this plan is adopted, we would then put all of these items into our annual cycle for expansion applications to the province. So I'll leave it at that. That's really sort of quite a lot of information to take in at this point, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. I'll start the conversation by just a couple of comments, if I may. I'm really pleased to see you're looking at later open hours. What I've heard from a lot of service providers is when people get off work, they're not able to take the bus home because there's no bus route. But when you work in a minimum wage job, that's like a whole hour's wages to pay for taxi. And it's okay now because it's light out later on. You can walk home if you have to, but during the winter months when it's dark and rainy at 4:30, 5 o'clock, it becomes difficult to walk home. So I think that's fantastic. I think that's going to help a lot of people. And as far as the ridership to Sproat Lake, last council term, the mayor and I met with every accommodation provider within the city of Port Alberni to talk about the MRDT. And the feedback that we got from every single accommodation provider was that people staying at their places of business, their hotels or motels, they had so many requests for a bus route out to Sproat Lake. So it would help tourism, but also help people who may not have a car to enjoy Sproat Lake for the summer. Sproat Lake is a huge asset to the whole Alberni Valley, and a lot of people may not be able to enjoy it. So maybe in the future, like during the summer months, modified hours, like 2 or 3 trips a day, I think could really help out a lot of people who can't go out there or don't have cars to go travel out there. Any questions or comments, Director Beckett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can see that your mic is on, but I'm having a real tough time hearing you. Almost no volume at all. Thank you.
Okay. Or anyone else out there that heard that can fix it? Can you hear everybody else, Bob, or it's just me you can't hear?
It's a little bit better now, but I'm still struggling with it a bit. The speakers at the podium are fine.
Okay. Director Sparrow, then Director Cote.
A quick comment and then, so I got one thing. If you want to go from Port Alberni to Nanaimo through Qualicum Beach, what do you think the estimated time would be for a one-way trip?
Yeah, so if we're to build out that connection, say that starts tomorrow. We were looking at a roughly, so you'd be taking the service to the Ravensong Pool, you'd be connecting to the Route 9. I would have to go back through the service specs for what the running time of the Route 9 is. But we've done forecasts based on generally what we look at is look at the driving time to and from the start and end point of the route. We would add on about 20% for like contingency for stops along the way. If we were to institute stops, say like Whiskey Creek or Coombs or whatever that might be, I couldn't give you an estimate in terms of time without looking at the specs for the Route 9, unfortunately, but I could get that information. Sorry? 60 minutes. So 60 minutes plus probably another hour. So about 2 hours roughly. And what we would be looking at doing is working with if this was to be something that we would initiate, we'd be looking at working with the NIMO scheduling team to better align the Route 9 as well with those incoming connections to provide timely connections at Ravensong, so people aren't stuck there for like an hour. We'd be looking at making those more efficient.
Sorry, I'm just going to check my mic. Bob, I changed the wiring. Is that better? Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Director Jack, for that suggestion.
Okay.
On your slide, you have Sumas School and you have AW Neil in your drop downs. You should try and fix that. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, the updated maps on the website have the new school names, so I'm not sure. Okay, I will do that. Okay. We updated those about 6 months ago, so I will double check.
Director Cote, then Director Jack.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm just curious about School District 70 and how you're working, or are you working with them? And will the school buses be able to integrate with the BC Transit in the future? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question. So my understanding, so I wasn't part of the stakeholder engagement sessions. Those happened with the previous planner. My understanding is that the school district was in attendance and provided feedback for that. In terms of the school bus service, what we try and do is we try and work with the school, and this is not just for Port Alberni, we do this in other communities as well. We try and work with the school districts, usually in the spring, to better align our service with the bell times. I know in certain communities, the school buses, they only operate outside of a certain catchment area. So if you live, say, 5 kilometers outside of the school area, the school buses will be in service, but you're not able to utilize those as a student if you're closer. So we are looking at doing that across all of our systems on the island, is better aligning the bell times. What we've noticed is there are certain times where we're developing a schedule, say in February or March for that September, and the bell times then are coming out and being published in July, and we're not able to make those changes. So we're really trying to be proactive with the school districts to make sure that there's alignment there and students aren't getting to school, like 1 minute before a bell time or 5 minutes late. They're getting there 10 to 15 minutes early.
Thank you, Director Jack.
So I think it's just a question about interregional. So I have an UMO card. Can I use that across interregional, or is that part of the plan? Is it all one system?
So my understanding is that you would be able to use UMO interregionally. There are certain systems. Oh, did you want to speak to UMO? Okay, you can speak to it.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of UMO, it depends on how you use your card. If your UMO is an account-based system, and so that means it's attached to you. But if your account is set up for sort of just cash, if you just put cash on the card, stored value, then you can use it in any transit system in the BC Transit envelope without whether it's interregional or local service or any place in the province, excluding TransLink because they have a separate card. But then if you have just a monthly pass for local use in Port Alberni, then you wouldn't be able to use it unless, depending on how we set it up. So I would just, sorry, I don't want to go too into the details, but I'll give an example. And I'll say that in Cowichan Valley, we have a monthly pass product for local service. But then for more money, you can get a monthly pass product for the local service and for service to Victoria. Or you can get a monthly pass product for service locally and service to Victoria and service to Nanaimo. So there's a few different levels of monthly passes available. So when we explore interregional service, we look at, okay, what are the fares that we want to align and how do we fund it? And what are both the fares on the front end and what is the funding model on the back end? So it's all part of the conversation with setting up a new service. And we work closely with the ACRD staff to say, okay, what do you need for your taxation bylaw to look at the costs and breakdown according to from our finance team to understand it.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you both for coming here today. We really appreciate all the updates and the hard work that you do to make these things happen for our small rural community. So thank you so much. Before we move on to the next discussion, we're just going to take a 5-minute break because a couple other people's mics are a little quiet. So we're going to see if we can readjust them. Hey, I think everyone's back. So we'll carry on. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Had a bit of a technical glitch, but we got it sorted out. So the next item for discussion is the Alberni Valley Aquatic Center governance. And this is our fourth discussion. And Terry, would you like to do your presentation?
Great, thank you. I just accidentally closed it, so just give me 1 second. Trying to get everything else closed. There we go. Okay, thank you. So we are continuing. We actually haven't discussed this since October, so there has been quite a pause as we finished budget discussions and regrouped during the year. And so we're going to try to pick up where we left off. And so I'll just remind you that the goal of this process right now is to conduct a referendum in the Alberni Valley to determine if the public supports the construction of a new aquatic center. I did modify the goal based on our budget discussions this year and added or a renovation of the existing City of Port Alberni owned facility. So a slight modified goal at this point. The decisions that we have made regarding the service establishing bylaw to date are we have set the service participants as the City of Port Alberni, Uchuklesit tribe government in the electoral areas of Beaufort, Sprout Lake, Beaver Creek, and Cherry Creek. We have determined that we will do it by referendum with approval being required separately in each area. We have defined it as a aquatics center only. We're not talking about all recreational facilities, but just aquatic center for this service. We've also done a modified voting so that the voting on administrative and operation of the service will be 1 vote per participating area director. And then we did talk a little bit about the cost recovery aspects. So the one thing we've talked about is user fees and other sources of revenue, such as grants, will be used whenever we can. However, we are not going to set those rates until we have a facility to talk about. So they will be included as an option in the establishing bylaw. So this was the big scary number that we talked about in the fall, which was the estimate of approximately 100 million to construct a new facility. This is based on the HCME report that was completed in early 2024 with some Class D estimates added of 25%. And an estimated start date of 2027, which I think at this point, the earliest we would have a referendum would be the fall of 2026. So I would say that 2027 construction start date is pretty ambitious. But just to give you some ideas of what the construction of the facility that was designed based on the public feedback as part of that feasibility study, this is where we were at. Based on that large price tag, the directors then took a tour of the existing City of Port Alberni owned facility, Echo Center. And as part of the financial plan have included $75,000 for a feasibility study on the renovation of this city-owned facility. The city has recently appointed us a project lead from their side of this discussion. So we will get going on that RFP here shortly. However, at this time, I would state that I still believe that the discussion regarding cost apportionment could and should continue, as I think a renovation of the size that we are talking about would still see that the facility is transferred in some form to the ACRD and is made as a sub-regional service. So I am proposing that we continue to talk about apportionment methods, but also recognize that if the directors would like to wait until the conclusion of the feasibility study to continue these discussions, I'm happy to do that as well.
Director Ross?
Thank you. I noticed that Uchuklesit tribe government is a service participant, but they're not at this table. So what's the makeup of the committee here? Like, I don't understand.
She's just not here today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she is
okay.
at this committee. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So today I thought we could continue our discussion on the recovery methods of taxation and apportionment only. I proposed and have built this report and presentation based on the numbers that we were using in the fall. because they can just be sized up or sized down based on what we decide. So I just thought for continuity purposes, let's continue using those numbers. So I have done it based on a new facility with no grant funding provided. I would like to say that that is worst case scenario talk. But as you know, construction costs and the tariff discussion and all those great things, I still can't even really guarantee that. But I feel like that's a very high number that I would be very hopeful that we could build underneath. So I've done it on a borrowing of approximately 5.6 million. Those would be the annual borrowing costs, 5.6 million, and annual operating costs of 2 million for a total cost of 7.6. So all these numbers that you're going to see are based on that. I will also note, just for continuity purposes, I did also leave the 2024 assessed values. The 2020 as the assessed values are going to continue to change every year, and I did not want to confuse the conversation by throwing those news in. I have all of those spreadsheets here if you would like to look at them, but I just felt like it just muddied the water in the conversation. So at the last meeting, we had actually presented 5 options and 2 of which were removed. So we are now discussing today, or what I believe we're going to discuss today, is an apportionment method of 50% land and improvements and 50% population. And that would be a tax base of using land and improvements in the participating areas. The second option would be 70% land and improvements and 30% Stats Canada population. And the third method is using the annual borrowing costs by parcel tax, and then the operating costs by converted land and improvements. At that October meeting, the directors removed the 2 options for discussion that were land and improvements only and parcel tax only. So as we had done last time, and with all of those items, there is a summary in your report that talks about apportionment by participating area and estimated household costs based on those averages from 2024, the allocation of costs based on BC assessment class, and the summary of costs by BC assessment class. So I think we'll just jump in and talk about the 3 and see if you have any questions about them. So this first one is supported by staff, but I would say it isn't the one that we have recommended. But that is a hybrid of 50% population, 50% land and improvement. One of the reasons why staff struggle a little bit with the apportionment being by population is that we don't have the ability to tax people. We only have the ability to tax land, and we tax it by either parcel, improvements only, or land and improvements. So the apportionment is how we divide the pie between the different areas, and then the tax base is how we are actually charging the individual homeowner. So as we are dividing by population, it does make a difference to the areas, but again, we can't tax by that. So it does make a bit of a difference, and all those tables are in your report as well, including a summary one. And I've done it by residential class. The other thing that's interesting about formula using population is it is only updated once every 5 years by Stats Canada. So I don't think that's either here nor there. It's just important to note that that's not something that changes every year. That data is only gathered once every 5 years. So sometimes you can see quite a significant jump or decrease in an area depending on what's happened. Like 5 years is a pretty long period of time for a community that's either experiencing growth or maybe becoming more recreational. And in this situation, almost 76% of the costs of the aquatics facility would be paid by the residential property class. So moving to an apportionment method of 30% population, 70% land and improvements is a little bit less of that, more based on that historical model of that land and improvement being the base. And in this situation, again, it's very similar. 76.1% of the taxation is paid by the residential class. I will show you the table at the end that shows how the 3 compare for each area. this is a model of using parcel tax for the debt servicing costs and then having converted land and improvements doing the operations. There's a couple things. I struggle with this one. You just have to remember that your single family residential parcel is paying the same as your industry parcel or your large commercial parcel. I don't mean to pick on Walmart, but they're a very obviously large commercial property. And for them to be paying the same, for example, as a single family residential, you just have to keep that in mind as you're considering this option. And then it would be the converted land improvements. There is also an extra administration requirement when you're doing parcel tax. So in this situation, that would be an administrative requirement to have a parcel tax roll, both in the city of Port Alberni, and the city staff would be having to administer that, including having a parcel tax roll sitting every year. And then again, in the rural areas for the 4 electoral areas. With Uchucklacet, they don't pass their taxation requisition on to the individual owners. So they would not have that same requirement, but would still pay their share based on how many parcels that they had. So it would be for that parcel tax, if it was just for the debt costs only, it'd be about $436 per year for each parcel. And then you would have the operations cost on top of that. And this is the one that goes by area, but this is kind of the one that shows you what your 3 options do and how it impacts each of your areas. So I think I'm just going to leave it there. I feel like I've explained this a couple times now, and I'm not really sure what additional information you're looking for. So I'd really just appreciate questions and feedback and discussion, and happy to go back and forth on the slides. I will leave this up for a minute, but I can stop sharing if you would like.
I think I'm fine if you leave it up. There's only a couple of people online, so that's all right. Dr. Sparrow, please go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation and going through all the numbers. You recommend 30%, 70% or 50-50. So why was the difference? Like, why did you just lean that way as opposed to going the other way?
I do struggle with the population apportionment because we can't tax people. So if you have an area such as, let's use Beaver Creek, for example, got a lot higher density than say Sprout Lake. And so you end up with a much higher cost per household for those areas. So like if you're at the, and really the numbers don't show all that much difference, but over time they could. So I just really, I know that there's a lot of concern about the equity and fairness of the land and improvement model, but when you're moving to population and we don't have the ability to do like a per head taxation for these items, it is hard because we are still at the end of the day taxing on land and improvements, even if we're dividing it by the different areas by that population. So I guess I kind of question the fairness of that. I will say fair and equitable is the difference. It is different in everyone's eyes, and everyone's going to have a different perception of what is fair and equitable. There is no magic formula for this. It's really where we are comfortable landing.
Well, I look at the 50-50 versus 30-70, and the highest low, lowest high number actually is lower than the 50-50 model, so it might get a better chance of passing than 70-30, but there isn't much difference between the two. Yeah.
Thank you, Director Roth.
Thank you. I think that if it was up to me, I would go with option 2, just saying. Certainly not option 3. Oh, yeah, the parcel tax because of Beaufort's position on that. But yeah, option 2 would probably be best.
Can I also add, like, we could do 25-75, like I've just put these out as thoughts. So we could do 60-40, like they're just kind of a couple snapshots of where I've calculated the numbers. So if there's a number of population percentage that you are more leaning towards, then we can definitely take a look at that. But these were just presented for conversation.
Director Cote, then Director Jack.
Thank you. I've put my position forward in the past. I'm not in favor of any of these. I would like to see a parcel tax because then that equalizes everything, and that is my position. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Jack, then Director Minions.
Not that I get a vote per se, but it does look like option 2 is probably the most medium of them all, like the more measured one. And I just think 30-70 is a good mix. I've seen 75-25 at NTC, but that's in a different context. But that does bring up bad memories of the fights around that. So I have much more to add.
Thank you, Director Minions.
Thank you. I think I support option 2 as well with the split as presented. I think, as we've noted, for so many different reasons, there's not going to be a perfect solution here, but I do think that this takes into consideration a lot of the conversation that we've had over the course of all the time we've been talking about this, and comes up with a bit of a happy medium in many areas. And I do really want to kind of, I think, just speak against parcel tax. I understand Director Cote's comments on it, and why it does feel more comfortable in some people's areas. I think that the concern is really just like the large taxpayers. I mean, if we look at like Catalyst and Walmart and, you know, so many other large taxpayers paying the same as someone in a single family home or like a farm property, that just doesn't feel equitable, and it doesn't feel like the best way to tax. So I think option 2 is a really good happy medium, even though unfortunately it's not everybody is going to feel perfect about it. And I think that's a hard point to get to, but I'd like to proceed with option 2.
Thank you, Director Cote.
Thank you. Sprout Lake residents can't afford this. Going forward, I think that they're being presented as a cash cow here. When it's looking at the residents that are there, there's a lot of seniors that live there, people that are retired. The image that Sprout Lake residents are all wealthy is a fallacy. People can't afford this when you start adding, I'm looking at the cost, when you relate it to land and improvements when it comes to the taxation that actually is presented to the residents. This is an average. So you're taking all of the lower cost properties and mixing them in with the higher cost properties and turning it all into assessment based. So it definitely is not apples and apples, and Sprout Lake is being exceptionally hit hard. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cote. Any other questions or comments? Terry, please go ahead. Then Director McLaren.
Just that there's a couple things. If the concern across the board is the cost of the facility, then I do think we need to have a serious discussion about the renovation when that comes in, or the grant reliance. And are we wanting to go to referendum and state that we will only proceed if we can get 50% grant reliance, say, for example, so that you're at that $50 million build mark instead of the 100 million. Realistically, how easy is it going to be to us to get a 50% grant within 5 years? I'm unlikely, I would guess, for a recreation service, but maybe not impossible if we can do some creative stacking. But again, not easy. I will point out like that West Coast multi-use path was $1 million, and we tried, I believe it was for 6 years before we got the stacking correct in order to be able to complete that project. Recreation projects are just not seeing those large grant funding coming as like wastewater and water treatment is. So we definitely could do that. I also feel like at this point, maybe bringing in the consultant. So Alan Nielsen had done some work with the previous board on this, and I built up based on what he had provided some of that stuff. And so we could definitely see if we could engage him to come back to have this discussion. Or the third option is we just decide now's not the time to bring a referendum about a pool to the community, and that we aren't there. I think that's kind of where I'm at, is I've presented from a staff perspective where we're at. And I think that we need to kind of pivot from here if we can't make a decision on these today. And so those 3 options to me are get a consultant in to kind of lead us through the pros and cons of, say, that parcel tax a little bit more clearly and how it's been impacted across the province, make a decision about the maximum amount we are willing to have this facility be, because we could also revise the new construction design and reduce some of the elements and ask HCMA to come back with a simpler pool design. Yeah, or just decide at this point, the community is not ready for a pool discussion. I don't love that option, but it is an option.
Thank you, Terry. I was going to suggest if we can't come to consensus today that we do bring in a consultant. You've done a fantastic job. I don't think you can take us any further. They already have. Director McClellan and Director Roth.
Yeah, thank you very much. Another consultant and another debate isn't going to change probably very many people's opinions. You know, looking over what we've got here, and I guess depending on where you're representing, you look down the number, which is the lowest for mine, and that's the one I like the best. But I think number 1 or 2, probably 2, I guess, is a more of an average. Well, I don't know what else you're going to do. It's been gone over hundreds of times, and you've done most of the work as far as figuring out numbers. We got to decide, are we going to do something or not? And if not, then you can explain that to those who feel they need the pool, why it's not coming, I guess. And that's probably fair, but number 2 is one that I think we can live with.
Thank you, Director Roth.
Thank you. To me, definitely the 100 million idea is a no-go, whether we bring it to referendum or not. Grant funding is unlikely. I read somewhere that Raven Song, they were offered a grant up to $5 million and from the federal government. And that was the largest that had ever been offered anywhere in BC for a recreational facility, and it was turned down. So, well, the renovation was turned down in Raven Song. I think, to me, this all hinges on whether or not, or what the cost would be to renovate the existing pool. So I think the $100 million price tag poisons everything, because there's no way people can do that. Thank you.
Did you want to say something, Director Jack?
Yeah, I think if the sentiment is that we can't settle on like some sort of mutually unhappy option, then you do look at reducing costs. And I think that's renovation. And as long as people are willing and able to understand that they'll have to explain that the capacity of pools in the entire region will be reduced as a result, then that's fine. I do think that this is a conversation that we need to have with actual users as well. I don't know, this just seems like it's the confluence of a lot of the inflationary construction costs that we saw when we were improving the Bamfield Road. The difference of a few months meant the difference of quite a significant cost. Thing is, it's always going to get more expensive. It's never going to go down proportionate to our purchasing power. So like, you have to think about this as there's no pool now. There's not going to be a pool ever. And so that's a consideration that you need to put in, because, you know, if not pool, then what happens when the rink actually gets to that point too? Right? So there are considerations around that too. It's not going to get any cheap unless we somehow get that many more population. So just be cognizant of that. That's all I'd say. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to kind of add to that, when the city originally did its pool study, feasibility study, I think for the deluxe pool, it kind of had all the bells and whistles in it. I believe the cost was around $25 million. And that was 2011. And now we're looking at $100 million. If we would have proceeded at that time, the pool would have probably paid off by now. We would have a brand new facility. So the Director Jack is completely right. The longer we wait, the more expensive it's going to be. And my second comment is, I wasn't here for the financial budget discussions on this, but I really think $75,000 cap on a feasibility study for the renovations of the existing pool is not going to be enough money. They're going to have to do coring and geotechnical work, and that's going to drive up the cost. So I think I expressed this concern you Dan on, I said, maybe it'll come back with the RFPs, but I don't think we're gonna get what we want from the $75,000 feasibility study. Director Roth.
Thank you. At one of our meetings, a couple months ago, Cindy Solda attended and, for the city, and she told everyone that in the electoral areas, as far as the pool goes, there were only 200 users. Now, I can't remember actually if it was 200 or 300, but nonetheless, it's less than 5% of the regional district area. So we kind of need to look at that too. So yeah, it's just such a difficult conversation, but thank you.
Dr. Sparrow.
Thank you. If we decide on going 37 or 50-50 today, when we pivot from a new pool to a work pool, we'll call it, then we can still keep these numbers moving forward. So once we discuss this today, we can sort of put this part to bed because it's gonna, if it's not gonna come up again, then we're gonna get old wounds all over again. So hopefully we can get through a decision here that we can all swallow somehow and move forward to the next process. Hopefully.
I think we should proceed, as Director Sparrow says, it's not, that doesn't mean that we're going to go to referendum, but we need to make some kind of decision. And I also think that we have to look at increasing the amount of the feasibility study. I don't think that's going to be enough. And I think we have to look at maybe toning down all the bells and whistles that we had put in, because I think there is things that we can cut out, which also lower the cost. And we're going to have to really rely on in-kind contributions if you want to get this thing done. So, any other comments?
Are you looking for a motion?
I would love a motion if you'd like to make one.
How would it be if I make a motion that you go tentatively to option 2?
Director Cote.
I have stated that I'm opposed, so I will be voting against this. And so if there is a vote on this, Sprout Lake is at this point, I guess, then we're going to be pulling out. Thank you.
Director Roth.
And this, everyone or no one? So if Sprout Lake pulled out, if they can, then it would just end the discussion.
From what I'm understanding, the referendum goes to every area, and then if Sprout Lake votes no, then we'll have to come back
But that's not what Penny's saying.
at the referendum stage.
But that's
That's
not
the
what
way
Penny's
it
saying.
is it not correct, Terry?
Yes, but if a director is going to propose that they are not a service participant at this time, it'll be up to the other directors if they want to continue without that director or if that just ends the service discussion. So I guess the two options are do the directors not want it to proceed to referendum, or do you want to choose a model and then take it to referendum to see what the public input of that option is? So if the directors can't choose a model that they're willing to put to referendum, then at that point, it's basically not at the table. You could allow Director Cote to remove Sprout Lake from the area and share the cost among the other areas as an option. But I believe the sentiment around the table has been kind of we're in this together or we're not. So yes.
When it goes to referendum, it's going to be the new pool, but also thought it was going to be the option of renovating the existing pool. So are not both options going to be on there?
I would see it going as the directors are going to choose which facility you are going to take to referendum. So it would just be one facility. We'll bring back the feasibility study. We'll discuss whether we want to bring the renovated option to the public, or if you want to bring a scaled down version of the new a facility to the public, and then take one facility with the associated borrowing to the public for a referendum.
Dr. Jack and Director Roth.
Okay, I would, if it's still intended, I would second Director McClemens' motion, but at the same time, I would say we need to be clear that we're talking about what the apportionment approach is going to be for either of those instances. Figured they should be the same. I do have a question for Director Cote, however. Is there, of any of the options that are palatable for everyone else, are you willing to vote yes on it, or are you dead set on only getting your way?
If I could answer. Sprout Lake cannot afford $1.3 million annually. It's just beyond our ability to pay.
Okay, Director Roth, then Director Sparrow.
I have to agree, it is very unaffordable. I mean, when I looked at my personal property and what my tax increase would be, it would be about $1,000. That's unreal. That's awful. And I have a little tiny house. It's just that I have a lot of land that makes it valuable. So I do understand Director Cote's position, but I also think all or nothing.
Director Sparrow, then Director Minions.
Actually, my hand up was to say that her hand up.
Director Minions, please go ahead.
Thank you. Appreciate all the comments that have been made. I agree with Director Roth. I don't want the tax increase either. And I think again, so my mind goes to, can we all come together on the apportionment method that we would like to put forward? I think there's probably a commonality here that we think the 100 million, with the amount of grants we're going to get is too much. I think it's unaffordable for my community as well. That said, I think that the apportionment method that we're talking about, option 2, is the most palatable. So maybe it's a matter of acknowledging that that is the most fair and the most equitable apportionment method, but recognizing that the price tag is still too high and needing to do work on the renovation option or a scaled down model so that we can put a variety of options in front of the community. I think because this is such a large and important endeavor, my ideal would be to say when we go to the public, and I know we can't necessarily do this with a really precise level of accuracy, but my preference would kind of be for us to set the apportionment method and then to say to the public, do you want a renovated eco pool at this price, a scaled down version at this price, or a $100 million pool that we chose with these features at this price? And I recognize that that probably means we need 2 referendums possibly on this. But I think going to the public twice on something of this importance is not a bad thing. So I know we've had so many conversations about this. I don't really know if we've talked about the option of doing a referendum where we're like narrowing down choice, like of the 3 options. Ideal, like big pool, this small or scaled down pool or renovation before we go for actual borrowing authority. But I almost think that that is maybe how we should be proceeding, just given the importance of this decision. I think the $100 million price tag is crazy, but I also think that our community may vote for it. Like we just don't know. And I can sit here and say it's too expensive for my community. Director Cote can say the same thing. Like other communities might think it's perfectly fine. But ultimately we don't know until we give our population a chance to vote. So I think my preference, as much as it is not going to be ideal in a lot of ways, would be to almost think of this in 2 phases of asking them formally what option do they want, and then going back at a later date once we have like Class D estimates for permission to borrow. Thank you.
Carrie, please go ahead.
I haven't experienced this myself, but I do believe what one way to do would be during the next local government election would be to do it as a non-binding poll and provide those 3 options so that the public can then vote one. Maybe there's a 4th option of no pool at all or something, but then we, from that information that we receive, which is non-binding, but would help the directors select which pool option you want to take to referendum, you would then proceed with a referendum on the one option. It is something that we definitely could explore. I would just also like to mention about Director Haggard's process or concerns about the feasibility study. I think that what we should do is build the scope of work and send it out. Tell the people that what the budget is, but that there could be some flexibility, and let's just see what we get back. And then when it comes back to the board, we could definitely talk about if there's other options for funding that other piece. It's not going to be super easy to fund anything more than 75 at this point, but we do still have some not the Canada Community Build Funds, the other ones that the province gave us a couple of years ago that's still sitting. Growing Communities Fund, there is still a little bit there that we might be able to use depending on interest rates and what's coming in. So we might be able to fund it that way.
Great, thank you. Director Jack, then Director Roth.
So I am supportive of using a poll because I think the referendum rules means you have to have only two options in a given referendum. And it's usually a yes or no, not an either or. So, I mean, it's a bit of a delay, but at this point, that seems to be the way about it. I would say that this board could make a decision just to eliminate $100 million. I think that's like that full option is just not palatable because of that third zero or that third digit. So that's just going to psychologically scare off everyone. That scares off larger communities on the other side of the island. So I think that's just there. I think the other thing that needs to be considered is the discussion around apportionment about the actual end cost, or is it about the percent share so that you'd still have the same? Would you have the same opinion if the costs were half what they are, a quarter of what they are in regards to the apportionment calculations? Or is it more about the total number? And I know that it's a depends conversation, but it just seems like apportionment is coming up as a conversation around what's going on. And that's just from the chairs of the regional district's perspective. That's just kind of dividing the entire region in a way that would be not helpful in the future. But that being said, there are things that can be just not done as a result to reduce costs. But I think we're just running into that generational issue of having to replace a bunch of infrastructure. There's no getting around it. You either replace it or you don't. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Roth.
Thank you. There are other priorities for Beaver Creek too that we would place above a pool. But aside from that, I would like to make a motion to do as Terry suggested and have a poll at the next local government.
There's already a motion on the table.
Oh, for a poll?
No, the original.
Oh, okay, so we can't make a motion because that one's on the table. Okay,
Well, I can withdraw the motion if that smooths this meeting down. I was just to help you get a vote. I wasn't saying it was even a good idea.
Okay, so we've drawn the motion. So Director Roth, would you like to make your new motion?
yeah, I would like to move that that the ECRD conduct a poll at the next local government election in 2026, as suggested by Terry, because she explained it quite well.
Can I just suggest that maybe investigate? Like I said, I haven't done it before, but
Sure.
investigate an opportunity to do that.
Sure.
And we can bring back some information on that.
Okay, thank you.
Director McClement, are you seconding the motion or did you want to comment?
Oh, sure, I'll second Susan's motion and comment. The only problem with that type of a motion is you still have to do it again, and there's nothing wrong with going to the people 2 or 3 times if you haven't got it right. But it doesn't firm anything down, but it looks to me like they're just sitting here today that first time I've had this conversation for a lot of years and not much has changed. And not many people are agreeing, so I think that's something you're just gonna have to do.
Director Minions, then Director Cote.
Thank you. I do think that it's important to decide on the apportionment method as well in option 2. So I was kind of putting my hand up to hope we could stop Director McClellan from withdrawing the motion because I think that we could proceed with that still so that we can stop talking about the apportionment method, at least as like a main focus of this, and start spending our time and resources on costing out those options. So I would love to circle back to that following this vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cote.
Thank you. Sprout Lake will have to pull out of the conversation then, because 1.3 million for Sprout Lake of probably less than 2,000 people. And you compare that to the city of Port Alberni, 4.7 million for all of the people there sharing the cost. It's just, there's no equity here. Thanks.
Would you be willing to look at it if we, not today, but would you be willing to revisit this if we toned down the bells and whistles and reviewed the facility and trying to get those costs down? Would you be willing to have another look at that time?
I'd really like to see the cost of the renovation of the pool come forward. I don't think that at this date, I am not in favor of spending $100 million on a pool. I don't think that our communities can afford it. So the only option then I think is to look at refurbishment of our pool that's happening, that we're going to be looking at. And I think at that point, maybe then we could look at apportionment. Thanks.
I think everyone is in here is in agreement that $100 million price tag is too much. But my question to you was, would you be willing to revisit it if we can get those costs down on a new pool? Revisit the facility design?
I still don't like option 2. If you look at the numbers, Sprout Lake is paying the highest. Thank you.
Terry?
Can I just share my screen again regarding the 5 options that we originally presented, and I do also think that maybe it is important to make a motion today to remove the $100 million option and state a new facility, because I actually feel like that might go a long way in the public too, to say that if that's where the directors are feeling, then I do kind of feel like that's where we're at. Do you want to move? Okay. Okay, so I just wanted to bring back the 5 options that were below, and there's some error messages showing at the bottom there, so you're not gonna be able to see the by jurisdiction. But just talking about Sprout Lake, so the difference between parcel is 1.1 million, and the difference to do 30% population, 70% land improvements moves it up about just over, well, yeah, 100,000. And then if you were to do a 50-50% model, it actually would be less than the parcel tax. So I just wanted to make sure that Director Cote was aware of that, because there actually is quite a few parcels in Sprout Lake. And so it does still end up with a requisition share unless we came up with another model that is not one of these. But I just wanted to bring back those other 2 options that we eliminated at the last time, just for information.
Thank you. So that's an average. A parcel tax is a straight, that's what your assessment or your taxation is. When it's converted to assessment based, that varies on properties. So
okay, so I thought you were talking about the allocation between, like, say, the city of Port Alberni and the Sprout Lake area, or the Beaver Creek area and the Sprout Lake area. And I just wanted to point out that the requisitions by area under the 5 models, the variation between those 5 models doesn't actually change a whole heck of a lot for Sprout Lake. But you're right, the basis of that model is different when it comes to your individual homeowners. Yes.
Director Roth?
I recall when the arena was being built that taxpayers had a choice between paying a parcel tax. Wasn't there something, or you could pay it all up front? There was 2 choices. Yeah.
Front, but I don't think that was part.
No, it was.
After the referendum was done, there was an option to prepay. I will say that prepaying a 25-year loan on 5 million, I think was the collective borrowing on that, is significantly different than 100 million. So we do quite often provide the prepayment opportunity. We did it in Bamfield with the water treatment plant. But again, the ability for someone to prepay on something that would be of this size and this annual cost, I would say would probably be unlikely that many people would do it. Salmon Beach, for example, in Salmon Beach, there was about 1/3 of their community that prepaid for hydro, but the whole borrowing was just over $1 million. So I can't remember exactly what it was per household, but it wasn't all that much. But I'm going to say that it is unlikely to have a lot of uptake at $100 million borrowing cost.
No, but what about, is there any way to to give a choice to have a parcel tax and or an apportionment Like, I just don't know. I haven't thought it through, but
Director Jack?
So on that, I think it's the ability to have a referendum, have that choice is limited because you have to have a referendum that's a yes or a no. So you doing a poll with those options, so people understand the options, and it means that you have a better sense of what each community would be willing to accept, and then from there you can better triangulate what's likely. It's not going to mean everyone's going to get exactly what they want, but at the same time, you'll have more information to justify moving ahead or not with any given option. Because you have to pick one option for a referendum, right?
The establishing bylaw could have all of the options listed under like cost recovery, but we would have to set a maximum rate that then could be established. So in Beaver Creek example, we have the ability to do tolls and we have the ability to do parcel tax. And through our discussions with your committee and then yourself as director, we can choose to change how much we do by parcel and how much we do by tolls. And in this case, we could have both converted land and improvements and parcel, and we could change that over time. But I think the messaging would be clear upfront as to kind of like that option 3, which was option 5, is to do the borrowing cost by parcel and then operations cost by land and improvement. Just declaring something like that, we definitely could do that as part of the establishment bylaw.
And you, Director Sparrow?
Thank you. I'm looking through all the options here. And the only one that has any sort of parcel tax to it is the last one. And I know that's the way that Director Spalding wants to go, but I'm thinking of people in my area, like the farmers, they have like a lot of lots because over time they buy them and move on. So if they do a parcel tax, they get taxed like 10 times. Whereas if you get a big box store in the city, selling one parcel, they get taxed once. So it's disproportionately harder on the farmers out there in my area because of that. So I know which we're all independent what we're doing, but we all have different needs, and I can't really support a parcel tax because the sheer fact is it's going to hurt people in my community more than it would hurt the bigger areas, like the big apartment blocks in the cities on one block, one, whereas a farmer gets a bunch more. So it'd be disproportionately harder on my area than it would to put a parcel tax. Thank you.
Dr. McClellan?
Is it possible to call a vote on the last motion?
I was going to ask Cynthia if she could read it out. Just remind us, if you don't mind, please.
Okay, so it is that the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee directs staff to investigate the opportunity to conduct a poll to consider options for the Alberni Valley Aquatic Center during the next general local election.
Any final questions or comments, Director Sparrow?
Do we not have a motion for a referendum at that time, or would that be pulled off, or what's going to happen with that one?
All in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Motion carried. Director Jack?
I'd like to move to remove the $100 million option from any consideration going forward.
Can I just get some clarification on that? Do you mean to revisit the design and try and get the cost down, or?
It's vague enough that you can interpret it that way. We're not going to consider $100 million. The original design is not on the table. So you could go back to the drawing board. You could do the renovation. It's just, that's the ceiling. Everyone agrees on that. I'm pretty sure that it's about the total cost first, and then it's about apportionment. So yeah, let's just remove the top option so that people don't think we're somehow angling to try to get that, because we're not. I think that's important to note. Thanks.
Director Roth?
I'll second that and I completely agree. Thanks.
Any questions or comments? So my question to Terry is, do we go back to the drawing board then if this motion passes, which I think it's going to, or do we just scrap the new pool? Or I'm not really clear what we're doing here. Director Jack?
I'm not scrapping the idea of the new pool. I'm just scrapping the Cadillac version. There are other options available, and I'm not killing the project. I'm not doing anything. Just that is not the option anyone's going to be willing to consider. So we're trying to narrow down what the options are. So the options are now renovation, whatever that could be. Don't make it 999, 99,999,000. Don't do that. But like now we're narrowing down what's more palatable from a total project, total cost perspective. So like, we don't have to go back to the beginning. I didn't put that in the wording. Okay.
Director Cote.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think that right now we're putting the cart before the horse. I think that we need to find out what the renovation cost is going to be before we start putting any numbers out there. I think that a poll may be a good idea, but in the future, and I don't think we're ready for that. That's why I voted against it.
Thank you, Director Beckett.
Thank you. I'm a little bit concerned about the motion that says we're not interested in $100,000. And even though Director Jack has said that the intent is not to kill it, I just think that the community and staff would benefit by having a little bit more explanation with respect to what it is that we are trying to achieve. And of course, that whether that's a renovated pool or whether it's a new pool, it speaks to, I think, being affordable for the communities that are involved. So the question, and I know that Bamfield is not part of the referendum moving forward, but sitting here listening, it begs to ask, what is affordable, and what would the board be comfortable with, and is that not something that we should be trying to ascertain so that we're not spinning our wheels and spending a lot of time going back and forth? Thank you for allowing me to express my thoughts.
Thank you, Director Beckett. Director Roth.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we couldn't work backwards and create a budget, saying what our top level is and making a project work for that budget. Like it might be that we think public will approve 30 million or 35 million. So what can we do with that? Instead of working the other way where we present, we've got $100 million pool. Do you want it? Let's look at what we think that the public would accept and work that way, work backwards. That's how I do budgets often.
I think I agree with Director Beckett. I understand what you're saying, Director Jack, but I think it needs to be, are we going to have next steps for staff, or I think the motion is just very confusing for me.
So the explanation here is I'm trying to show that the board is trying to understand the way that voters think, not the way that we think. So the Bamfield sewer project died because people were fixating on the total costs, right? To them. And we weren't being specifically aware of how that could work. The same thing holds true here. So this is what we're doing here isn't just talking with us. It's also being watched by the public, and therefore understanding how they're thinking and us showing how they're thinking is going to build some degree of trust and understanding. That matters more than staff feeling comfortable. So if we're going to go in a direction of, we are not going to foist $100 million project on a community or community of communities that's smaller than the RDN, and they've rejected a bunch themselves, that's the sentiment of the public. And therefore we have to find the options that are palatable or do nothing. And you have to actually show that, because right now we have at least 2 jurisdictions complaining about apportionment because everyone's worried about the costs. No one's seeming to understand that the costs are only ever going to go up. So we have to act accordingly. So either we choose to do nothing, or we find something that is workable in regards to what we think, because we represent the community. So affordable is not something that we're going to be able to ascertain because affordable is more subjective than objective. Right? So that would be a waste of time because what I think is affordable for somebody, they might not, right? And then you just get into a bun fight. So that's not worthwhile. It's just not worthwhile. But what cannot happen is you cannot have the person who defines affordable at the lowest to be the one who carries the day, because that's not good either. Because then you just don't have a community, you just have the collection of houses. So like there is an art to it, but the art happens here at the table. And if it takes people being willing to actually not fold their arms and disengage completely at this table, then we have to find out what will actually keep them engaged. So part of that's apportionment, but part of that's total cost. So we all agree $100 million is too much. That's enough for us to agree to take it off the table. We don't necessarily need to go to the people for that because we know how that's going to go. We've seen how the votes go everywhere else on the island. So like that's not hard to ascertain. I think we have to show that over time. So what we do next, we can figure out, but the top option is no longer an option. That's the idea, right? We're communicating with the public as much as we're communicating with the staff. The staff have to figure it out. The public will have make their opinions based on the discussions we have here. So like, I just think it's reasonable to do it. There may be better wording for it, but then we can always come back to the table to redo the wording if it's necessary. But this is more about managing the actual population and their expectations of us. So if they know we're not going for the most ridiculous option, and many of them will believe we're still going to go for the most ridiculous option, even if we're not, we have to show them that, right? So that's why in earlier conversations, Director Boyko wanted to go to a referendum right away, just to show the population that no, we're going to listen to you. It's not going to be like the RDM, right? And so like trying to understand that and put that forward in a way that makes sense for all of us is probably the way to do it. But I just think that it's low-hanging fruit. It's not an option for any of us. And so I think we're going to have an apportionment conversation later, but I also think that the total cost is going to be the number one concern for everyone involved, both here and in the public. And so why don't we show them that we're not ridiculous? And I think that's a reasonable way to do it. If it's about the wording, then I would invite everyone to improve the wording, but from that perspective, it's what are we actually going to do? How do we communicate what we're actually going to do? What are our actual intentions? So on and so forth. Like that's the meaning behind that. So it doesn't alter everything. It doesn't take other options off the table. It's just this thing is an item that's a slide on the slide deck, $100 million. We're not doing that. Let's find something else. And yep, there's more work involved, but there was always going to be more work involved anyway, because no one's going to go for the $100 million referendum. No one is. So like,
Call the
let's
question.
skip to that.
Any final questions or comments? All in favor? Oh, do you want me, Cynthia, to read the motion?
That the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee directs staff to remove the $100 million original design as an option for the Alberni Valley Aquatic Center moving forward.
All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Director Minnis, did you want to bring forward a motion about the apportionment?
Sure. I liked the motion that Director McClellan put forward. I think it was just to proceed tentatively with option 2. If somebody wants to second that, and then I'll speak to it.
Director Jack seconded.
Thank you. I don't think that we need to officially commit to this apportionment method. I do view this though as kind of the best happy medium for all of us, recognizing that Sprout Lake, I think it was the highest option for Sprout Lake. there just is not going to be an option that satisfies 100% of everyone. And I do think that the biggest thing here is that we get the cost significantly down. And then those differences between the options are going to end up being relatively minor. So my reason for wanting to proceed with this today is that I think it takes it sort of, it checks the box. It doesn't make it official. We can still come back to it if we need to. It's a tentative, you know, we're going to bring forward numbers based on this option. It doesn't make it the official way that we are moving forward 100%. We can still have further conversations about it in the future if we need to. But I think it sort of lets staff give us numbers based on this when they're bringing back further information in the future. And it sort of checks something off that we can have, you know, a path on at least, so that we can have more productive conversations about the bigger items, like, are we doing a $30 million renovation and what does that look like, without being sort of distracted by differences that I think are going to end up being a lot less significant option to option if we bring the cost down. Thank you.
You, Director Cote,
I will be removing Sprout Lake. Thank you.
Director Minions.
Thank you. I'm just going to comment that I don't think that a director can remove their area. Certainly not from the motion that I made. And I would just ask Director Cote to, I think, like, work with the board on this, because there has to be an option for moving forward. And ultimately, I think that it's reasonable for Director Cote to say to her community, I didn't support this apportionment method, but it's still, I would say, on Director Cote and all of us to allow her community, as well as all of our communities, to vote on an option at the end of the day. If they agree with Director Cote that they don't like the apportionment method and therefore they don't want to move forward with any aquatic facility, then that's fair. We've given all of our areas the ability to say no and therefore kind of kill the process. But I do think it's still reasonable for us to put the decisions in front of our communities, Sprout Lake included, for them to decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cote.
Thank you. Sprout Lake, I remain solid. I'm not willing to participate in this. I think it's premature. I want to see more numbers before I would commit to anything for my community. Thank you.
Director Roth.
I think I support Director Cote in that. I think it's smart to see the numbers first. So we don't have to decide on the taxation method right now. I think that would be smart. Thanks.
Great, please go ahead.
Yeah, just two thoughts. Like, this is just, if we pass this motion today, it's just so that we stop discussing it and we'll stop bringing it forward. You will still get another vote at the board table, not at this committee, on this apportionment method once we have the full establishing bylaw. So basically what we've done is taken all the pieces of an establishing bylaw and tried to set them, such as participants, how do we vote, who's getting the referendum, how's that being conducted. So this was, the apportionment is just one piece. We cannot proceed with anything until we figure out what that top cost is. What is our maximum cost? And so again, that would be another piece of the establishing bylaw. And then that would just come to the board for consideration and a vote at that time. But basically it's, and the other, if we're not going to pass this motion today, I would ask that you direct staff not to bring forward apportionment discussion until we, whatever information you're needing. If that's a final design or something, if we could do that, that would be great. Because otherwise I feel like we'll just keep circling this conversation, or a consultant, I guess.
On question, Terry, if we decide to, for the feasibility comes back and, you know, the X amount of dollars for renovations, that apportionment would apply to the renovation cost if that's the way we decide to move forward. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if you go with the 30/70 today as proposed, then we would just bring it back on that one mechanism. We won't be bringing you back 5 options. We would just be bringing you, this is what the cost would look like, this is what it looked like by area, and provided on that one. At that point, you could definitely pivot again and say you don't want to do it in that manner, you want to discuss something different. But that cost and apportionment is going to move with the cost of the facility over time with the operating costs as they change, but also as the different communities change and as one community grows and another one shrinks, all those costs will the share will change slightly.
Director Roth?
I would like to make a motion after this motion to that effect. Because I think that it would be important to stop discussing the apportionment now until after we know the costs of the proposed water center.
Director Sparrow?
If we turn down the motion now, we'll still have these three options coming forward again with a lower number. And if we put the motion forward, and have one option going forward, is that what you're sort of saying?
Yes, it's just to put down a piece of the discussion. So if we can agree that that's a piece of the discussion, I almost brought it back with $1 million price tag, but that third option doesn't really work on that. But I almost just brought it back with $1 million so that you could just see per million what this was going to look like. But that last option, that's a combo of construction and operating, made that too tricky. But yeah, it's just to set down this piece of the conversation for now. When we get to the part where we think we have all the pieces of the puzzle, it will all be laid out on the table again for a vote. We just, my opinion would be, we're not going to go through it component by component by component again. But yes, if you want to add back an option to be considered and have staff bring back something later, absolutely.
Okay, any final questions or comments? Director Cote?
So how does the vote go now that I know that I'm voting in the negative? Can I withdraw myself from this motion? Or do I have to just vote in the negative? Thanks.
So for Robert's Rules of Order, because you are a voting member, you would vote against the motion. If you were to exclude, like leave the room, then your motion wouldn't be counted, but it's suggested that you make your stance as voting against. Yes, and if you abstain, it goes as a yes. And then you could also request a recorded vote as well.
I would request a recorded vote. Thank you.
Final questions or comments? Okay, so we'll go around the room. Dr. McClellan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, on city council, we do it one by one. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, all in favor of the motion, please keep your hands up till I call your name. Director McClellan, Director Jack, Director Sparrow, Director Hager, Director Minions, Director Beckett. All opposed? Director Roth, Director Cote. Motion is passed. Okay. Director Roth.
So I can't make my motion then, because that will. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I can't do it.
Okay. So no reports, no late business, question period. Is there any questions online, Cynthia?
There are no questions received in Zoom and none in the email inbox.
Can I get a motion to adjourn? Moved by Director Jack, second by Director Sparrow, all in favor. Any opposed, motion carried. Okay. Okay, lunch is ready. Let's go eat because Josie's gonna be here at 1 o'clock. Thank you, everyone.